Madam President.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
Madam President, I begin with the enormously serious economic problems facing the United States. An unemployment rate which is rising, 2,800,000 jobs lost last year, thousands of people losing their jobs every day, recognizing the very heavy psychological factor which is at work, cited for the destruction of consumer confidence, and the eyes and the ears of the world are on the United States, on the United States government, and on the United States Senate tonight to see whether we will be able to respond to the magnitude of the problem. The psychological impact, if we were to reject some activist approach, I think would be devastating, not only on Wall Street and on Main Street, but all across the face of the globe. Based on the telephone calls which I've gotten in my office, this is a very unpopular vote. Perhaps the tide will turn, but the calls are mounting from one end of the political spectrum saying there are too many expenditures, and the calls are mounting on the other end of the political spectrum saying that there's not enough money being spent on the proposal which we are advancing here tonight, and perhaps the tide will turn on reflection and on analysis of the program which we are setting forth here. Perhaps the tide will turn as exemplified by a letter issued today from the United States Chamber of Commerce, principal spokesman for corporate America and a principal spokesman for conservative America. And the Chamber says this: therefore, this legislation, because the economy continues to deteriorate. The Chamber is for the bill because it supports pro-growth tax initiatives. The Chamber is for the bill because it applauds the inclusion of tax relief. The Chamber is for the bill because many of the spending side provisions of the legislation will also provide stimulus to get Americans back to work, focusing on infrastructure spending for roads, rails, public transportation, aviation, inland waterways, and ports. I have already noted certain grave concerns which I had, and one is the rush to judgment which we're a part of, and perhaps a necessary part. When President Obama came to speak to the Republican caucus recently, when my turn came to ask a question, I said, "Why are you wedded to February 13th? That's too fast to digest a bill of this magnitude." And I said that we had passed a $700 billion bailout bill, TARP, where we didn't know what was in the bill. We didn't have regular order of hearings and questions and cross-examination or committee work on the markup line by line or the committee report. We didn't even have a floor debate. And we made a lot of mistakes. And they were compounded by the administration carrying it out. And I voted against the release of the second $350 billion. And I said, Mr. President, let's not do it again. There's nothing magical about February 13th before we start the week of recess for President's Day. The President responded, emphasizing the severe nature of the problem and not telling us all, which he has told us privately, about the serious problems which he sees and his advisors see for any delay at all. So we're responding to his timetable. I don't like it, but I'm responding to it. There are other aspects of this bill which give me heartburn. There's a lot in this bill which ought to be part of the regular appropriation project. I served for 10 years as chairman of the subcommittee funding the Departments of Health, Human Service, and Education. And I have fought hard for many of the items that are in this bill that ought not to be in this bill. They ought to be part of the regular appropriations process, where we set an overall budget and we fight it out on priorities. But they are here because the administration and the bill proposed by the committee has seen fit to include them. There are many who are criticizing the amendment which we are offering here this evening. They say there are cuts in important programs. Well, that's wrong. There aren't cuts in important programs. If this bill is not passed, there won't be any appropriations. So you start from zero on Head Start, and you start from zero on child development. And it is true that we have made some reductions in the size of the appropriation, but that's not a cut. For example, on child care, the committee bill has $2 billion, and we have seen fit to put $1.4 billion in. Well, if we don't have 60 votes, child care doesn't get any additional sum. My preference would be to handle it in regular order. Head Start in the committee bill for $2.1 billion is going to have $1,050,000. Title I in the committee report has $5.1 billion and will retain $4.5 billion. Special education has $13 billion, and we've left it all in because that's a federal mandate. It's different. National Institutes of Health has $10 billion, an item that has special significance to Senator Harkin and myself in our lead on raising NIH funding from $10 to $30 billion. But NIH will produce 70,000 jobs, according to the head of the National Institutes of Health. Now, what have we accomplished here in the amendment which is being offered now? This bill, in coming to the floor, and these figures are pretty close, they're hard to be exact. The bill starts with $895 billion. There are add-ons on the floor of 29.5. The bill, as it's being reported, is 781, perhaps 780. So we have reduced the expenditures by $145 billion. That's a lot of money. And that is something which makes everybody angry. But that's a position that you're in if you're a United States Senator. People are unhappy because they didn't get the full amount from the committee report, although absent this bill, they'd get zero additional. And people are unhappy on spending too much money, but it is imperative, as I see it, that we do something very, very substantial. There are reasons to argue that this is a bad bill. I'm not saying it's a bad bill. I'm saying there are reasons to argue that it's a bad bill. But I do not believe that there is any doubt that the economy would be enormously worse off without it. And that's the kind of a choice we have to make. And personally, I would prefer not to be on the edge of the pen, as so frequently is the case in this body. But I do believe we have to act, and I believe that under all the circumstances, this is the best we can do, and we ought to do it. I reserve the balance of my time.